Welcome to the Art of Yarn podcast. This is episode 5. See, I told you to get 2 this month because I forgot last month. Might get 2 in December because I'll have more time. Maybe. I always think that, and then I'm like, oh yeah, Christmas. So what I'm going to do is, for like our topics for the next, I don't know how many episodes, it'll probably go on quite a while. I'll be talking about yarn and how it functions, how it's made, and like just your basic how to store things and dyeing techniques and like terms and things that don't get proper. I've been hearing a lot of like weird, I'm like, that's not right, information lately, with like blogs and Pinterest have really like taken over, where magazines and books used to give information that's been passed down through generation and generation, and like physics has proven it with some of it. And then also the annoyance of like, let's make a roving blanket where you knit it and it's going to turn into a piece of crap. Don't do it. It's going to turn into a piece of crap. And we'll get into that because it is driving me nuts. And it's driving a lot of, like, yeah, it's a really great way for a business to make money, because that buying enough roving to make a blanket, that's going to be $100. But I know one of my past local yarn shops, she is very hand weaving or heritage weaving and spinning. She is all about educating her consumer. So she informs the person who wants to buy it, like, this is what's going to happen. It's going to turn into a felted, pilled piece of mess. Like, that's what's going to happen. You won't be able to wash it, and it's a blanket. Like, you need to be able to wash a blanket. Anyway, getting super derailed there. Save that for later. So, don't really have anything finished to talk about. But what I've been working on, my Your What's, I'm still working on I'm getting close to the end because my yarn is running out. So that's always a good sign, but I'm still working on this. I've been working on it a little bit more. This shawl, the Walk in the Woods shawl, almost done. Once I get towards the end of my skeins of yarn, I'll be putting in the garter edging, and then casting off and blocking, hopefully. I'm really lazy about blocking stuff, but I'm happy with how the colors are coming out, and it's so squishy and joyful to touch. The other things I'll be inserting some video. I remember to use my phone. I always forget, like, oh yeah, there's different ways to record things now because I'm an old lady. Anyway, not old. My weaving, so I'll be recording that like now, or not recording, inserting that now. Thing I've been working on that I keep telling you guys about, but don't see it. So this is tapestry, and these will hang down, so you see repeating waves. And I need to get my butt back on the loom. and weave. Yep. Hope you enjoyed that. So the other thing I created was some art that is on fabric sorry, that's like really just dropping crap all over the place. Yikes. So some drawings on fabric that I hung off of the second story balcony at the university that I work at. They were having a for the National Women's Conference, like a women's in the arts thing, like words are not coming to my mind. So they had a couple art shows. They needed art up in the some public art up in the courtyard and stuff, so I quickly made this in a day, and it needs work. But it was one thing I wouldn't know that it needed work until I got it up. I think I actually like it like scrunched and like on itself more than I do hung up, and I'm going to be painting on more imagery in different sizes and line width. And then I also have a bolt of pink chiffon. This is like chiffon that I like stashed, which is great because it's like I'm using it, you know. And I would totally like wear something like, oh, here's this funky gold that not a good color for me, but like I would, if this wasn't art, like if I decide this is like just a crappy idea in general, I would totally sew this into like a garment. So I'm going to take the pink bolt and do similar treatments. I need to figure out which creatures from my world I'm going to draw on them. My pink bolt. This one's kind of like an origin. It happened to come out like this weird origin story. Kind of like, I think I want to tweak that more so it is a bit more of like a narrative scroll. And the other one I'm not sure. I think the other one I may focus on gender a bit more, with it being the color pink and fabric, especially chiffon, it tends to lean towards like it's a loaded material. Pink chiffon is a loaded material. I mean, there's no way to get around it. It is. So, but I'm really excited for it. Like and my I'm also excited that I had cutting board or cutting table issues. My mom got me this one that she got herself that folds, and her iteration is a lot more sturdy than mine was. Mine was a pile of poo. And then a friend was moving and she gave me her old wheeling kitchen island. So it's a bit narrower than I would like prefer, but it's still like, it works perfectly. Especially if you're cutting a folded piece of fabric, there's no issue. Sometimes like you get fabric hanging off, so then I kind of have to release tension on it by like piling it on some like bins or something next door to it. And then but my printmaking, my padded printmaking, fabric printing surface that I made to like be removable fits like perfectly on it. So that's super, super duper exciting. It'll make dyeing and printing on fabric really easy in my studio. So let me think real quick before we get into the meat of our conversation, and I pause the filming to grab something that I forgot. In Kyla's Lab News, I'm going to be redesigning my bands, so they'll be simpler. My plan is to take like my white yarns, my undyed yarns, and take a really nice photo and then put my brand and labeling on that. But they'll still be bands. I'm not a tag person, so. Yeah. That's that for Kyla's Lab News. Nothing to, yeah. What we're going to talk about are the basics of plying and spinning today. So, the difference between singles, 2-ply, 3-ply, 4-ply. Once you get into 3-ply, it's kind of multiply after that. There's a slight difference. Especially once you get to 4, it's kind of, it's more what the fiber needs. And then the next episode we'll be talking about like the other types of yarn. So like chained yarn, knitted yarns, things like that. So, and I will show you guys the books that I have gotten my information, magazines that I've gotten my information on, and I will also leave good sources below. So like, a link to the book, a link to like online magazines. Knitty has really great information on it, on their website, like their articles. I know I tend to get seduced by the patterns and I forget to read articles. Articles are really good to read. And other knitting magazines have, I don't have any in my stash, but I've seen it in the past, have had articles on yarn and ply. So, what yarn is, this is roving, and this is wool. I believe it's merino. I don't have a tag telling me exactly what it is, but it is a soft, spongy fiber. And fibers, especially natural fibers, have a staple length. And the staple length is what was shorn off the sheep, probably about there, when they got their hair cut, at the time of shearing. So, or it's the length of cotton when it was like the length of the cotton boll, like the length of the fibers that are grown from the plant. So, that's staple length. And they can vary from a couple, like an inch to like, if it's a bast fiber, so that's a fiber of like the linens, the stalk of the flax plant. So that's linen. It can be quite long. I will, when we talk about fibers, I'll get into that a bit more. So, and then to make yarn, let me just draft this out a bit. You take these loose fibers that will pull apart easily. Just whoop. All right. And then you add twist to it. And the physics of the twist hold it in place. That's a little piece of yarn. So this is why using roving that you're not going to felt after to knit or hand knit or crochet with isn't the best thing, because it can pull apart and it will felt and pill. So this big fluffy bit here, that I could actually pull fiber off from. All right. So, because it wasn't tightly twisted. And that can affect your finished product. If it's, and like, maybe you want that and you don't mind it, that's fine. But you need to be aware before you work on something, especially if you want something heirloom, or when we get into fibers, I've made mistakes. Like, I've learned from mistakes too. Mistakes are wonderful things to learn from. So, roving, a lot of times you'll see indie dyers where they hand chain or braid. So here I'm just going to hand chain this roving. So this is like how the internet keeps telling you how to make these stupid blankets. Well, if I tug this enough and pull on it, as if I were a washing machine, or my cat kneading on it, or a toe, finger or toe going through it. There you go. So if you are adamant about using this to make a blanket, felt it first. You can felt however many yards you need to make that blanket by taking some soapy water, warm soapy water, and agitating it back and forth. It'll compact it, make it stiffer, and it will, but it'll help with it. It'll make it into fabric, a tube of like a solid piece of fabric in tube shape. But, well, cylinder shape because it's filled. But it won't fall apart on you. So, anyway, so after you twist the yarn, my little sample that I untwisted. Alright, so my SD card ran out of space. And so there may be weird editing error spot. Anyway, so back to singles. Alright. So once you have yarn, this is a singles. This is 1 ply. So nice and round is a benefit. It can be very soft. The downsides, or the neutral, depending on how you feel about it, is it can bias. So depending on which direction it was twisted in, it will skew either to the right or to the left, clockwise or counterclockwise when you're spinning it. And it's also weaker and will pill and felt easier. And halo. Halo is when you get fluff coming off and like out of the core of the yarn. Think of like Angora and mohair tends to, they brush up that halo so you get this like super fluffiness kind of coming out. So this is a commercial single. It is, there's still some twist in here. It may not twist as much as like a hand spun single, but it's still, there's still a slight turn to it. So, and here, if you, I don't know if the camera's catching this fuzziness that I can see in person. I don't think it is. Nope. Maybe it is, and I just can't tell on the little screen. This one's already starting to halo, and I can see where pills would start to happen. And this has been in a skein and dyed and like not beaten up that much. Not as if it were a knitted garment. So, and if you like the haloing, it's great. You know, that's not necessarily downsides either. I think the biggest downside is it isn't as stable and sturdy as applied yarn, so you really need to pay attention to like what you knit with it. So for shawls and like cardigans, it's great. For socks, it's going to wear out and you're going to get holes. So singles will bias, and you can exploit that, especially if you're a spinner, in your weaving or your knitting. So Spin-Off had 2 articles at different years. This one is 2002, this one is 2008, where you use, I think this might be backwards for you guys, singles that are over twisted and energized. They haven't been blocked, and when you block them, it's really a temporary solution. Once you add water, that energy comes back to the fiber. So here is an example that's easy to see on the camera of, she used a clockwise and a counterclockwise, or S and Z twist, to like bias her knitting for her. It made that chevron for her. That's pretty cool. So, and this is Catherine Alexander, that's why I was saying her, that knitted and wrote this article. So Spin-Off is a really great, and spinning magazines and spinning books are really great places to learn how yarn functions, and about the different plies and things that a lot of knitting publications tend to gloss over. So the Intentional Spinner is great. It's about spinning yarn for an intent. So you're like, oh, I want to make this certain thing, like and it's also how to make yarn in a that looks a certain way too. Hang on, I'm trying to get. So there's a lot to spinning yarn, and it's addictive. So, but blah, 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 blah. So like if I wanted to spin yarn for a pair of socks, I'd want to pick the right fiber and pick the right amount of plies. And then and also the right, so here it kind of talks about making a perfect sock and the yarn that you should strive for to make that sock last, because you're putting in all this work. You want that stuff to last. So also this book, the Alden Amos Big Book of Hand Spinning. This one also has blueprints to make your own equipment. This is a classic. So, and it talks about knitting and weaving and yarn and so much wonderful information. So if you want to learn more about your materials, learn about how it's made. So, how single energized and single yarns are exploited in weaving. Let me see if I can not get a glare from my light. There we go. Is making crepe fabric. So, Collapse Weaving is a great book on that subject. So those of you who are weavers, you also need to know your yarn. Alright, so what happens when you take a single and twist it with a single in the opposite direction that it was spun in the first place? That's when you get a ply. That is how rope is made. That is how yarn is made. So, so when you put two, or that's when you get two ply, is when you put two singles together. So here is one of my 2 plies that I enjoy, hence why I dye it. And this one is BFL and nylon. So there is, it knits flatter. It's really great for color work because the plies will kind of lock into each other. That is why, where did my project go? My Walk in the Wood shawl is a 2-ply. I'm using 2-ply yarns because it's great for color work. It lays a bit flatter to really show off a yarn next to each other. And let me get this teal one because it's lighter. So if this one's a little, if I twist it in the opposite direction, I will reveal there are 2 strands that this yarn is comprised of. Alright? And then when I let it go, the twist goes back and it's 2-ply. So this fiber is super stretchy. So, anyway, trying to see if there's, it's kind of getting washed out on my screen and I'm not sure if you guys can see it well. So there are little bumps and ridges on the yarn. It is wonderful to weave with. A lot of weaving yarns are 2-plies, or 2-ply yarns. That is because when you're weaving, you're putting a yarn across another yarn. When you have a little ply in it, it gets like stuck. So then it creates a lighter fabric, especially once you wash it. So when you have a rounder fabric, that is a rounder yarn, that is excellent for tapestry because you really want to pack that down so it's really tight. Or like warp-faced or weft-faced fabrics where you're really wanting to pack it down tight. That's where a rounder yarn, so a 3-4-ply, is really handy. But for 2-ply is great for like plain weaves and just where you want to see, especially where you want to see your warp and your weft interplaying with each other. Because the plies kind of grasp on to each other and like hold each other in place. It's so adding the second ply adds more stability and it balances that twist because you're putting 2 that are spun in the same direction. So if I spun something clockwise, I'll be putting 2 clockwise together and twisting it counterclockwise. So that's counteracting that energy from twisting it and creating a yarn that will like hang out straight, especially if you get it spun correctly or spun, I hate to say correctly because you can over twist on purpose, spun balanced or commercial yarns are spun balanced. So this skein is, the yarn's not going to biased and things like that in general. Sometimes a mill can overspin something, it happens. But you won't get a biased in your knitting. So a 3-ply, it's also a way to create a yarn that's thicker too. Oh, I'll just add more plies and make it thicker and thicker. A 3-ply yarn is when you have 3 plies twisted together, all in the same direction. So this is my, oh, that's too neon. I've got it in white here. Oh, that was super neon. All right. Oh, do I need to turn off the light? So 3-ply has 3 plies twisted together. Oh, twisting it the wrong way. So when I untwist my plies, let me get my fingers between them. There are 3. So 3-ply creates a rounder yarn. And then 4 and 4-ply, however many plies you want to add, you'll get the same roundness of your yarn. So this is really great for cabling and where you really need to see that 3-dimension, like that 3rd dimension of yarn. It's a round thing. You really want that round stitch. It has really great stitch definition, especially if it's not like fluffy. Fiber makes a big difference with stitch definition too. They all play with each other. So, to make wonderful yarn. Okay, anyway, so this has excellent stitch definition for your yarn, for your patterns for your patterned knitting, where you really want to see the difference between your yarn overs, your knit stitch, and your purl stitch. So cabled and cables. Look for yarn that has 3 or more plies. It's also less likely to, it's also creating a little bit more stability because there's more plies interacting with each other, creating like more structure. Especially for something like socks. So this is sock yarn. This is my, like, merino is not the best for socks. You should really go with something a bit more sturdy. They put nylon to add stability, or even if it has mohair in it to add stability, but BFL, that's great for socks. So this is like another of my sock yarns. It has nylon in it for some stability, but it's great because it has wonderful stitch definition. So my other sock yarn that has nylon and the BFL, it has less stitch definition. So depending on what you want to knit, if you're wanting to do a color work sock, the 2-ply would be better because it would make like a flatter feeling fabric. Then this would make a bulkier feeling fabric. This is going to be great for a cable pair socks. So 4-ply, it has, or more. Here we can look at the tails of this. So this is cotton and bamboo. Cotton, because it has a very short staple length, it needs to be spun smaller, like in a smaller strand, to have enough twist to hold that staple, to hold the fiber in place. So it needs a lot more plies to create a thicker yarn. So that's yarn ply 101. More plies, it's sturdy. To simplify it, more plies is sturdier. Singles will bias because there's energy that hasn't been balanced out by another ply. Physics. So, I will post a bibliography, and I'll just post spin-off. I'll just post spin-off. If you want the exact, back order, all my magazines are pretty old. I got to a point in my knowledge base where I noticed the information I already knew, and I wasn't digging the projects, and I'm kind of like, okay, I don't need to buy a magazine right now. This one, we talk about cabled yarn. That will be next week. It's Plys on Plys on Plys. Also knitted, chained yarns, and the other things that could be considered yarn. Could keep talking, but I don't want to make it too long. So yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna post in the description below either links or bibliography information for you guys, because I'm nice. And also some good websites that have reputable information. I think that's it. It is it. So anyway, we'll after I wrote it all out, and it's in my sketchbook, and then my sketchbook is in the other room. So after we get done talking about yarns, we'll talk about fiber types. I got some great books that you can get nerdy with. I love learning about this stuff, and it's really important to constantly be learning, especially if you really want your projects to come out successful. Is really, the more you learn about it, it's like, oh, if I use this yarn, that project would have been a bit better. So next time when I make a similar project, I'll look for a yarn that fits it. We'll talk about color theory, some different dyeing techniques, like E-cot and tie-dye, shibori, same thing. Not a little bit different, but same technique. And things like that, just so you guys hear the terms, understand them, so when you see them, it's like, oh, that's what that is. I know. I don't have to be a confused consumer of yarns and fibery goodness. There's something else that I was like, oh, we should talk about this, and then I forgot. So yeah, I'll see you guys later. Bye.